There have been very few regimes in history, and indeed in the wider world of dystopian fiction, that have been truly immune to the primal kickback of the human spirit. Many a hegemony that has tightened its grip a bit too much or attempted maneuvers a bit too blatantly oppressive has found itself victim to this ancient set of impulses, rearing its head in riot and revolt whenever the spirit of a people feels their basic freedoms and free will is being threatened. This may at first seem comforting, the thought that something in our very humanity will inevitably bubble up against an oppression, but there is a far more sinister aspect to this truth. Because a disease, after all, works up an immunity to repeated treatment. There are few prospects more terrifying and existentially threatening to the continuation of humanity than the emergence of a strain of tyranny cunning enough to take that instinctive zeal at the root of so many overthrown regimes and to twist it into fuel. Nightmarish fictional prophecies, be it the blatant censuring individualized collectivity of George Orwell's 1984, or in the more secretive manipulation and collectivized individuality of the untold Sam clones in James Duncan's film Moon, warn of just how internally indestructible such a power could become by removing foundational points of internal and then external reference. The striving of the discontented for a better quality of life can be weaponized. The human spirit that once spelt unavoidable downfall to such an oppression being twisted into the very fuel of its parasitic immortality. The first and essential step in achieving such a system begins at a foundational level, through the constant severing of external connections and deprivation of internal respite, the discombobulation of the societal inner ear. In 1984, this is achieved by the replacement of true community with an illusory and ironically named comradeship, where each member would condemn another to vaporization to save their own hide in a heartbeat, while in tandem, the ever-presence of surveillance, represented best by the heavily ironic symbolism of the constant harsh lights that characterize the Ministry of Love, has created an ecosystem where there is no darkness. No time to gather thoughts, no time to truly taste respite. Ingsoc has cultivated a nation united both in its loneliness and in the concealment of such a perceived weakness as loneliness. A darkly ironic paradox where admitting one isn't feeling as much of a beloved and supported comrade as they might like to be would be to stand out in a sea of strong, devoted people who would revile your selfishness. And it is this very factor that keeps every single citizen in Oceania's party from raising their hand first in complaint. This bears a strong historical echo of the speech where Stalin could not even begin to speak, because nobody wanted to be the first to cease clapping and be revealed as the one person in the crowd not patriotic and devoted enough. Through this cunning use of imposter syndrome, the party is kept under a constant self-imposed fear of being exposed as the weak link who isn't satisfied with doing their duty. And in such a way, the collective experience of the party members is both infinitely individualized and completely forbidden from individuality in any form other than devotion to the collective. Moon, in a similar vein, shows the implementation of this intentional paradox in socially disorienting the victim of hegemonistic manipulation. Sam is deliberately deprived of live-feed communication with Earth and his family, keeping him isolated and drip-fed human interaction through pre-recorded messages alone, all while under the pretense that the company is struggling to supply the lucrative clean power provided by his services to all the third world countries that need it, as best as possible, and that as such they can't currently afford the resources or manpower to repair the live-feed satellite array. Through implication, placing the blame for Sam's growing discomfort and loneliness squarely on his own perceived selfishness for valuing talking live with his family over the well-being of millions of people who are being benefited by the resources he wishes to divert to simple repairs. Sam is first deprived of trust and confiding in other people, and then deprived of self-respect and trust in himself when the blame for his social starvation, at least he is made to believe, is entirely his. He, like the seas of patriotic comrades in the scrutinized outer party, has no remaining foundation for rebellion or blame shifting, as he is no longer provided the social frames of reference to say with certainty that his suffering is anyone else's fault except his own. The first step has succeeded, Even when given the chance, the populace under this regime are too distracted and disoriented to accuse their captors of being the true source of their discomfort. Now that this is safely implemented, the second component of the process begins, cultivating a situation where this controlled and safely diverted restlessness is stoked to a guilty frenzy. To create such a permeating and self-renewing fermentation of discontent bubbling below the minds of workers, all while having each individual hide their discomfort as a shameful weakness and work even harder to atone for their perceived selfish disposition, is to stir slowly together over time a highly controlled child of hatred and misery. An inescapable, inherent unhappiness that no amount of loyal work and no lungful of patriotic declaration can unseat. To create an itch of dissatisfaction that the populace infinitely seeks to scratch in all the wrong yet highly productive ways. Ingsoc achieves this underlying desire for fulfillment and happiness through strategic stemming and even deliberate wastage of resources, both to maintain the illusion that the party is fighting with every last resource at hand to fend off the heinous enemies of the state, and that each member of the party should echo their selflessness by accepting the current shortage of razor blades with heroic resolve, all the while keeping the standard of living in Oceania just below bearably uncomfortable, which provokes a paradoxically grateful and praise-refilled response. Because each time a satirically inconsequential static is proclaimed by the telescreen, each fictional battle won on a distant front, and each time the chocolate ration is increased from 30 grams to 20, this puppeteered relent in the control of resources is lauded as a victory won by the party to slowly, surely improve the standard of living. The perfect life you've dreamed of is possible, comrades, and it's only getting closer. We just need to work a little harder, for a little longer. And the prospect of each Sam clone seeing his family again, despite all of his memories of them belonging to the real Sam who returned to Earth 15 years ago and has no idea they exist, is the equivalent carrot-on-a-stick choice of the vile Hegemonian Moon, who, like Insoc, control and deliberate on every aspect of Sam's social starvation and mental erosion, knowing the restless discontent of each day will only strive to push him to work through each bloodying day till he can climb into the hibernation pod to return home, be discreetly incinerated, and be replaced by the new Sam beginning his 3-year term on the mining base. Dissatisfaction is brewed to corrosive and overflowing proportions, but every last drop is deliberately orchestrated. For, with the populace now too disoriented to discern the source of their unhappiness, and yet growing each day in the knowledge that life should be getting better, and that they are at fault for not helping more ardently to make it better, we arrive at the heart of this vampiric structure, the process of taking this most powerful of brewings in the human spirit, and of weaponizing it. For herein lies the crux to the true horror contained in such a regime. They have taken that primal force of rebellious striving, that zeal for a better life and passion for seeking out improvement and contentment, and they have made it both tangibly pursuable and forever unattainable. Generations of party members are fueled by the same discontent with the shortage of gin, then of coffee, then of the building's plumbing, all in the belief that improvement is on the horizon, that each day their labour is another step closer to utopia, and that each chance the party is given to improve their life is taken with utmost promptness and selfless nobility by their leaders. They work until they are vaporized or they drop dead and are forgotten, and they are replaced with a new oblivious generation looking to rebel in the name of humanity against this horrible situation, who want to take up the crusade of the party to improve the standard of living. And just as each Sam clone is defrosted, worked selflessly for 3 years of suffering, isolation, and longing to see his estranged wife and newborn daughter back on Earth, and is literally vaporized. Because the human spirit of righteous fury against injustice and fair circumstance is twisted by the very architects of the circumstance into the fuel source by which the machine continues to turn. The hegemony plays both part of the shadow nefarious villain and the crusading heroes of humanity charging against them, leading the attack on their own regime from the inside, so that wave upon wave of workers dash themselves against years of torment and suffering for all the right reasons, and die having never genuinely brought their fellow humans, nor the hopeless generations that follow them, any closer to the ideal they strive for. O cruel, needless misunderstanding indeed. The Ouroboros is set upon its own tail. The machinations of society are manipulated in such a way that the most primal instincts to strive for a better life are the very thing that keep generation after generation, Sam clone after Sam clone, in a very perpetual state of collective isolation, uncertainty, and deep-seated unhappiness. The disease has not only learnt to resist the cause of its previous defeats, it has adapted so that it feeds upon the vitality that once wrestled it off like an engorged parasite. It has won. And here lies the darkest futures in fiction. Not those in the outspoken howls of war, nor those crushed by those disasters after cruel disasters. Because in all these things the human spirit survives, and will someday rise shakily once more to persevere. But in such bleak worlds as 1984 and Moon, it is precisely because the human spirit survives that there is no more hope. For it is expertly discombobulated, drained of any day-to-day hope for contentment, and then enslaved in its hope of someday attaining it. This particular breed of tyranny is not terrifying for its cruelty or its outward barbaric treatment of human life. It is intimidating because it gorges itself on the very lifeblood of the only weakness it ever had. This is the secret to dystopian perpetuity, the artistic mutilation of fundamental instinct, and the terrifying prospect that the more hope and improvement and escape from its self-expertly induced hell the people have, the less hope there is that we will ever be free.